Alright, what is up folks? So class is back in session once again. So the topic of this video is going to be very controversial, could possibly trigger a lot of people. Well, that's why I'm doing this. So I'm going to talk about the extinction of white people, right? Immigration's been a very hot topic lately, especially for the upcoming election, right? We've all seen what's happening in Europe, in Canada, in the United States, in Australia, in New Zealand. How did immigration get so out of control? When did all of this start? You have to remember, this is all happening very, very recently. If you look at the demographic trend. So for example, in the UK, right? So according to their population census, in the year of 2001, the UK was still 90% white British. Not just white. White British alone made up over 90% of the population in the UK back in the year of 2001. That's not that long ago, right? How did all this change so fast? For example, Canada back in 1981 was 96% white. In fact, even as recent as 1996, immigrants only roughly made up 10% of the population. Native Americans made up 3%, and 87% of the population was still European Canadian, aka white. So what the hell happened? Why does Western Europe, why does Canada, United States, Australia, and New Zealand, why do they want so many immigrants so bad? How did all of this start? Well, you want the brutal, honest truth, okay? I have to be brutally honest. So I've been living in Canada for almost 20 years. This was because the previous generation of white people, they screwed you guys over, especially for the next generation of white people that's living in these Western countries. I'm talking about the silent generation, the boomers, and the Gen X. There's one word I want you guys to remember this, drill into your head. Union. So remember this word, okay? That's going to be the theme of this video. So what do I mean by the union? Am I talking about the Constitution, our founding fathers? No, not that. I'm talking about the workers' union. Okay, by the way, I'm 100% against this, okay? This does not make any sense. And I believe that it is because of white people's obsession during the 1970s to 1980s, I would say, with the workers' union. So this really frustrated their bosses, the really rich, the top 1% white folks at the top. They say that we've had enough of the middle class, that they keep complaining, they want the workers' union, they want to go on strike. So why don't we import millions of immigrants worldwide from developing and third world countries? We don't need these local white people to be complaining about us. Instead, that we can just replace them with cheap labor from third world countries. Okay, let me explain all of this. Hopefully this video is going to be long, but hopefully by the end of this video, a lot of points are going to make sense. So I was talking to this guy just a few days ago. So this guy, he graduated, interestingly enough, from University of Ottawa. He also came to Canada as an immigrant, but he was a white immigrant, so he was born in the Czech Republic. So in 1979, he graduated from University of Ottawa with Bachelor of Commerce. By the way, my degree is actually also Bachelor of Commerce. I found that very interesting. So let me write this down. All right, so let's get back to the board here. So here we go. Remember this union. Okay, that's the theme of this video. I know some of you guys are going to get triggered, but really listen to what I have to say. So this guy it's a white immigrant, okay? Immigrated to Canada as a kid with his parents. Bachelor of Commerce, graduated from University of Ottawa in the year of 1979. How many immigrants did Canada take in back in 1979? Well, the immigration target back in the 1970s and into the 1980s was roughly 150,000 people a year. And you have to remember, that's very important. You think about why youths are having such a hard time finding jobs now. Well, Canada last year took in 1.3 million immigrants. Well, yeah, no shit. Where are these people going to live? How are you going to find jobs for them? Because before, for every single person that applied for a job, every single person could find a job. Because, right, there was not as many people, and there was nowhere near as many people attending universities. He told me that in his graduating class, it doesn't matter where you were studying. Obviously, before then, they didn't have things like critical race theory or, gender studies. But anybody, it's not just the STEM field. You can study social sciences, you can study humanities, you can study religion. And every single person, he told me, that graduated from Algonquin's College, from University of Ottawa, from St. Paul's University, right, from Lasalle College, from Carleton University, every single one of them could find a job. He told me he didn't have to apply for a job. Right after he graduated, he was lined up with a job from the Canadian government. He worked at the CRA, the Canada's revenue agency. They're the ones who will deal with your taxes, right? And so he worked there all the way until he was 65. So he graduated at age of 22, worked there for 43 years. He just recently retired. And you know what's crazy? He told me that his tuition per year at the University of Ottawa from 1975 to 1979 was $2,800 in total. And all books, all other materials was included 100% free. He worked a part-time job on the side during those 4 years when he went to University of Ottawa. When he graduated in 1979, he was debt-free. He graduated debt-free, okay? And for the people who keep saying that, especially older generation, they say, oh, this generation has it so much easier. Okay, we have to work so hard. We have to grind for everything. They are full of 100% BS, okay? There's no freaking way in this world, unless you have help from your parents, then it's possible to graduate debt-free. Oh, that's the only option. Your daddy is a millionaire, he help you to pay for your tuition. If you're on your own, even working a part-time job on the side, there's no way you can get a 4-year degree in Canada and you can be debt-free by the time you graduate. And not just that, he purchased a brand new home in Ottawa in the year of 1980 after working for just 1 year. You guys want to know why? Because back then, the houses in Ottawa, he bought it for $50,000 Canadian. And back then, they allowed a 5% down payment. So his down payment was $2,500. $2,500. Yes, he had to have to get a mortgage, right? But remember, he was 23 years old. So he spent the next 25 years paying off his mortgage. By the time he was 48 years old, he was 100% debt-free. He got married. He had 2 children. He had his own car. He had his family van. He had his own house. He has 0 student loans, 0 line of credit, 0 credit card debt. Okay, everything he had, he owned. Okay, that was the true Canadian American dream. Back then, that was possible. And obviously, I don't care what you say, that is not possible for 98% of youths today. And obviously, the exception is that if you have help from your parents. But I'm talking about if you're completely 100% on your own, nobody can live this kind of dream. So what the hell happened? Well, one major contributing factor you have to look at is obviously there's rampant massive immigration, right? And back then, even when Canada was taking 150,000 immigrants per year, okay, the vast majority of the immigrants, they were coming from Europe. But Canada did not really have any immigrants or refugees from third world countries. It's when Canada started to take in immigrants and refugees from these third world countries, that's when things changed. For example, right? So Canada last year took in 1.3 million people. Probably, I would say 90% of that immigration population is non-white. And I would say 80% of the brand new immigrants that's coming to Canada, they're coming from third world countries. Because before, when this guy was graduating, right, whatever money he made, the first contract he got in 1979 was probably not very much. Let's say $10,000 a year. But, if you adjust it for inflation and everything, that's probably the equivalent of, let's say, $75,000 a year, which is amazing for a starting wage. But here's the thing, back then, right, you didn't have the option of the cheap labor. The Canadian government, they could only employ these local European white people. And if you pay them a really, really shitty wage, they're not going to work for you. But now, when you're graduating from University of Ottawa, from Carleton University, from Algonquin College, from University of Toronto, anywhere in any Western country, right, you have to compete as a 22 or 23-year-old with 0 work experience. You have to compete with somebody that's fresh out of the boat, that's just coming over, let's say from India, right? Let's say, what is a good starting wage at a Canadian government? I would say in 2024, I would say $60,000 Canadian. Okay, that's a good solid starting wage, because at the government, your money goes up very fast. If you start at $60K a year, within the next 4 to 5 years, you'll be probably $100,000 to $125,000. So $60,000, right? But the Canadian government, now they have this option. They're going to say, why the hell should I pay this Canadian guy, this 22, 23-year-old with 0 work experience, $60,000 a year? Now I have the option to hire somebody from India. I can hire someone who is 32 years old. This guy has a master's degree from the Punjab province, and this guy is willing to work for $45,000 a year. And instead, With a local Canadian guy, this guy only wants to work a maximum of 44 hours a week. But, the government's going to say, this guy I get from the Punjab province of India, he's willing to work 65 hours a week. And he does not want any benefits, no annual vacation pay, no paid sick leave days. And you can even waive his pension. So you can do whatever you want to exploit this guy from the Punjab province of India, right? He's willing to work for 20% less than money, no vacation pay, no benefits, no nothing. So yeah, obviously the Canadian youths are going to be struggling. That's why so many young people cannot find any jobs now, because there has never been this much competition. This has never been this level of immigration from developing and third world countries, right? These people were being exploited essentially for cheap labor. How did all of this start? Remember that word. Union. You guys want to know something I noticed over the years? I've been living in Canada for almost 20 years, right? At least for now, Canada is still a white majority country for now. That's changing very fast. White people love to complain and go on strike. What do I mean by this? Okay, this is very, very important. Listen to what I have to say. So, for example, if an employer hires a bunch of people that's fresh out of the boat from India, okay, they can pay them minimum wage. And even if they stay at the same job, even if they work 60 hours a week and they stay there for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, the employer has the option to never give them a raise at all. They can be making minimum wage for 20 years. So yeah, why would the employer hire local Canadian people when they can get these people that's fresh off the boat from India or Pakistan or Nepal? But here's the issue. When you hire a group of local white people, if they feel like, their wage is not justified for the work they're putting in, you know what? The first thing they want to do is that they will want to go on strike. Okay, if you don't think this is a white people thing, look up the history of France, right? I've been living in Canada for a very long time. At some point I had to learn a little bit of French Canadian. As I was learning these topics, I started watching many documentaries about France, their past revolutions, about Napoleon. And I learned about the French history and how much the French workers love going on strike. Look at what happened in the summer of 1968 in France. So in order to go on strike, right, you can't just go on strike by yourself. You need something called the union. Okay, and the white people absolutely love this idea, and the employers absolutely hate it, because every time you go on strike, okay, that's going to completely halt your production line, right? Let's say I'm coming from China. Let's say if I want to open a BYD electric car plant somewhere in Ontario, and would I rather hire 1,000 Chinese people to work at factory, or would I rather hire 1,000 Canadians? Well, hell yeah, I want to bring in 1,000 temporary Chinese foreign workers, because I can make these Chinese workers work 72 hours a week with no benefits, with no vacation pay, and with minimum wage. But if I hire 1,000 local white people, you know what they're gonna say? Oh, you don't pay me enough. Oh, and I want a raise. I want a 30% raise within the next 2 years. If you don't pay me, we're gonna form a union and we're going to go on strike. And even now, this is extremely common. If you live in Canada, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Look at how many teachers' strikes there has been. It's been absolutely ridiculous. It's disrupting everybody's lives, right? First of all, I support the teachers, their stance. The vast majority of teachers, I think there are some very good teachers in our country that should be paid more. However, here's the terrible consequences of having a union. For example, teachers union. When you have a teachers union, it protects the bad teachers from getting fired. The extremely woke liberal activists I'm talking about, the ones that wants to push the 2S LGBTQAI++ in our classrooms, the ones that say, death to America, the ones that wants to say that we need to lock up Donald Trump in jail for forever. Okay, listen, that's your own opinion. You should not be bringing that to the classroom. Unfortunately, there's a small number, I would say between 10 to 20% of teachers, instructors, and professors, and they don't deserve their jobs. They don't deserve their high-paying salary. We should not have our tuition dollars to go towards paying these instructors. But when you have a teachers union, right, the good teachers, they don't get really rewarded, because once you've been teaching for a long time, usually in Canada it's 10 years. And for professors, when you get your tenure, that's when you reach your maximum salary. After that, your salary only goes up by 1 or 2% per year. That's it. However, the person who does a terrible job at teaching, the person who is a liberal activist, right, the person that wants to bring their opinion into every single classroom, and they will punish students for disagreeing with them. And these people, they're getting paid the exact same amount of money as the really solid teachers and professors. The teachers union protects the bad people from getting fired. That's why I'm so against it. And the white people absolutely love this because I used to work at a factory for a year and 4 months, right? The factory did not have a union. And the Chinese people at the factory, the black people, the Indians, the Filipinos, nobody ever brought up, oh, we need a union. We need a wage increase. We need to go on strike. The white people, they organized secret meetings every single day. They try to bring a union into the company. They're constantly talking about, let's go on strike. Let's get a union. We need higher wages. And this is the exact reason why, many of these Canadian elites, the politicians living in the West, they wanted to bring in millions of immigrants from third world countries. It's so that they can suppress the value of labor, so that these people, because they will not try to organize a union, they will not try to organize a strike. And here's a downside of the union. I'll give you an example as a teachers union. This is a personal example. So this is salary of my math teacher. He retired in 2014. Although he does have a realtor's license, he still sells homes in Canada. So this was his salary. He told me his final year of teaching, he got $99,800 Canadian, and that's when he retired from teaching. And here's the issue, right? Typically, we'll just round it up to 100,000. Typically, if you have a job in Canada or United States, right, if you're making 100,000 before taxes, usually you can get roughly, I would say 70K after tax, possibly 72K, and depends on, where you live. But he told me that his income in 2014 after taxes was merely $62,000. So that is a nearly $38,000 deduction, minus 38% from his payroll. I asked what happened, and he told me that, did you know that, first of all, part of his salary was his bonus, because that was his final year of teaching. He told me for his bonus, he was taxed like 45%. And I had the exact same issue when I was working in the factory. They paid out a bonus twice a year. Yeah, every single time, if they say your bonus is $500, you're probably getting like $275. It's absolutely ridiculous. Like, your bonus should be tax-free. And also overtime should be tax-free, right? If you want people to actually work harder. Because, yeah, factories, you know that if you work Saturday, you get time and a half. If you work Sunday, you get double time. It's never time and a half or double time. The taxes on overtime are absolutely ridiculous. You wonder why Canada's productivity rate is so low, because people are not being rewarded for working overtime. So he told me that the teachers union, right, every single school board, certainly every single public school board, is mandatory. They must have a teachers union, because you cannot go on strike without a union. He told me the fee was $3,000 per year for the teachers union. Do you not realize how insane that is? And obviously, it's a little bit high because it's a teachers union. But typically, let's say if you're a factory worker, if you work on a production line, let's say if you're making $50,000 a year, okay? If you're making $50,000 a year, if your company had a union, you'll probably lose $1,000 every single year, because that's how the union's being paid. That's how people who are working at the union, that's how people on the executive organizing committee, people on the, the chair board of the union, that's how they get paid. Basically, every single employee, they lose part of their payroll. It goes to paying for the union. Sure, yeah, the union allows you to go on strike. You can say, oh yeah, let's go on strike. After we go on strike for a month, we come back, our wages goes up by 10%. But so what? It goes back to paying for the union. It does not benefit anybody. And every time you go on strike, it completely halts the production line. It creates disruptions. It creates chaos. And obviously, the bosses, the CEOs, the CFOs, they are going to absolutely hate this. So what ended up happening, I would say probably in the 1970s and 1980s, and this is very important to people say that, oh, we need to tax the rich. Okay, here's the crazy part, right? I've showed the chart before from a Fraser Institute. It's a conservative think tank. The bottom 20% of income earners in Canada, okay, only 5.2% of income actually goes to taxes. And as part of the overall grand picture of the total tax contributions to Canada's tax pool, you only make up 0.8% of the tax pool. The top 20% of income earners, okay, 44.6% of their income actually goes to taxes, and they contribute to a total of 61.4% of the tax pool in Canada. So who do you guys think the politicians are going to listen to? Are they going to listen to the middle class, to the bottom 20% who can only contribute to 0.8%? Or do they want to listen to the top 20% who contribute to more than 60% of Canada's total tax revenue? Obviously, they're going to listen to people at the top. And here's something that's more ridiculous. You can look this up. In the state of New York, the top 2% of income earners in the state of New York, they make up 51% of the state of New York's tax revenue. 51%. So to people who are saying tax the rich, all 100% BS, right? The top 2% actually pay 51% of the taxes. So let's say, these ultra rich, these top 1, top 2%, right? Let's say, if you're one of those people in the state of New York that's paying 51% of the state taxes, let's say you own a factory, a car manufacturing factory, right? And let's say you hire 1,000 local white Americans, and these people are constantly complaining and say, we want higher wages, we want to go on strike, you need to pay us more, we need more benefits, more paid sick leaves, right? And obviously these owners are going to get irritated because that's money going in my pocket. Why the hell should I share more profit with you? As long as I'm paying you more than the minimum wage, then I shouldn't be obligated to pay you more. So at some point in the 1970s and 1980s, I would imagine these elites, right, the people who, let's say, own the factories, the people who are ultra wealthy, successful entrepreneurs, they got tired of white people doing this. They said that, oh my God, look at these British people, look at the French people, look at the Germans. They're constantly saying, oh, pay us more money, and we're going on strike. We want unions. Then they realized something as they're watching the news in the 70s and 80s. This is before the internet. They realized, let's say, if they're looking at the Chinese work culture, by the way, it's very, very common still today, right? In China, many people are still working the 996, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, 72 hours a week. That is very, very common. So they're saying that, oh my God, so I'm hiring these white people, I'm paying them a crazy wage. And I'm looking at these Chinese people who are working at these factories, and they're making peanuts, and they're willing to work 72 hours a week with no pension, with no benefits, with no paid sick leave. Why don't I just lobby to our politicians on Parliament Hill in Canada? Why don't I lobby to the politicians in Washington, D.C.? Let's make a change to our immigration policy. Let's flood our countries with millions and millions of these immigrants from developing and third world countries, because I can pay these people minimum wage, okay? And these people will never ever complain about going on strike or forming a union. And these people are willing to work 72 hours a week instead of just 40 or 44 hours a week. Because who cares if a country is going to be destroyed? Who cares if we lost identity? We'll just put up a fake slogan that says diversity is our strength. Because the most important thing they care about at the end of the day, it's money, right? And they want to save as much as possible. So, that's why they lobbied to these politicians back in the 1970s and 1980s to radically change the immigration policies of these Western countries. It is because that they want to exploit these people from third world countries for cheap labor, because they got tired of the local Canadians, the local Americans, and local French people constantly complaining and going on strike, because they can say that now with globalization, we have the option to exploit cheap labor from other parts of the world. Let me write down some numbers. So roughly from the 1970s up until 1990, Canada was roughly taking 150,000 immigrants per year. But the vast majority of the immigrants at this point, they were still white. And then Canada made a drastic policy change from 1991 on until 2015. Canada said that we're going to take in 250,000 immigrants per year. And the vast majority of the immigrants coming from Canada from 1991 on, vast majority of them, they will be coming from developing countries and third world countries. It is because, the rich white Canadians, the CEOs, they said that, we need to exploit people from other parts of the world for cheap labor, because the labors for these local Canadians are getting too expensive, and they're constantly complaining about a union. They constantly want to go on strike. I know, many people are going to get triggered. You think I'm making this up, but it's 100% real. I've worked many different jobs in Canada, and you guys want to know who loves talking about forming unions, who loves talking about, raising the wages by 20, 30, 40%. You guys want to know who loves going on strikes and going on picket lines and holding up signs. And it's always white people who wants to form this kind of movement, who wants to form the union. Listen, I 100%, I agree. I understand that some jobs out there, they're not paying a living wage, but there are better solutions to this. Forming a union, it doesn't cut it for me, because once again, when you have a union, it protects the terrible, the bad workers, the people who just wants to be a wallflower. They just want to be a decoration. I'm sure you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. Every single company has people like that. They show up to work and they just want to sit in the chair. They don't do anything all day, and they just want them to spin around like this, right? That's literally all they do. And that's the number one issue of the union, right? It protects the bad workers from getting fired. That's why I don't support it. Also, That's ridiculous. If you're making $100,000 a year as a teacher in Canada, $3,000 going to pay for the union. You know what this does? Because the teachers are going to think that, oh, yeah, well, I'm paying $3,000 a year for this union, so I better make the most out of it. That's why they go on strike so much. They say that, well, if I don't go on strike this year, that's another $3,000 wasted. So this causes so much disruption to our society. And do you know who's going to become the victims of this ultimately? It's the students, right? They're getting their education, they're going to get their school experience completely destroyed. And also it's the parents, right? If both parents are working during the day, if the school goes on strike for a month or two, right, somebody has to literally sacrifice their income. Your family is going to lose half of your income so that somebody can stay home and take care of the children. So that's why I don't support this. And it's because I would say throughout the 60s and 70s and 80s, right, the white Canadians, the white Americans, the white British, and the white French people, they got way too obsessed with this movement. And at some point, the top 1-2% of these British, French, Canadian, American people, and they just said, you know what? We cannot deal with this anymore. Okay, these people, they're not worth our time. I don't want to deal with the union. I don't want to deal with the picket lines. I don't want to deal with people who are complaining about working overtime. So I'm going to spend a couple $1 million. I'm going to lobby to our local politicians on Parliament Hill in Ottawa. And I'm going to lobby to the politicians in Washington, D.C. We'll just stick a couple $1 million into their pocket. I will say that, you know what? The world needs a drastic change to our immigration policy. Let's flood our country with millions and millions of immigrants so we can use them for cheap labor. That's why USA also had their drastic change to immigration in 1990, right? So their immigration target became 1 million immigrants per year, and I believe now it is 1.2 million. But you see, even the United States is not as bad as Canada. So 1.2 million, that's legal immigrants. You have to remember, the United States has roughly 340 million people. Canada has 41 million. Right now, Canada's target for legal immigration is 500,000. So let's say if you adjust Canada's population to the United States population, that is the equivalent of the US taking in 4.3 million legal immigrants. That's just the legal immigrants per year. That's why everything's out of control. You wonder why your rent is so expensive. You wonder why nobody can afford to buy a home. Well, yeah, Canada is taking way too many people. And also, if you wonder why, our wages are just not covering our bills, you wonder why everything's so expensive. Well, yeah, because the value of your labor has been brutally suppressed when these countries like Canada, like the US, like Western Europe, like Australia and New Zealand, when they started to take in tens of millions of immigrants from other parts of the world. Because, yeah, they're willing to work for 30% less wages. They're willing to work 50, 60% more hours. And they will never complain about too much overtime. They will never complain about forming a union. And they will never complain that their pension's not enough. They will never complain about their benefit package is not good enough. And that's what's led to all of this. All of you guys, right, including myself included. I think, for me owning a home in the future, that's, just fantasy land, right? So we're all paying for the sins of the previous generation, right? The previous generation, like the guy was said at the start of this video, he was born in Czech Republic, moved to Canada as a kid, graduated from University of Ottawa in 1979, right? Bought his first home in 1980, and he was completely debt-free, married with 2 children. He had his family van, he had his own car. By the time he was 48, he never had to search for a job. Right after he graduated, he was set up with a government job, right? So the previous generation, both in the East and West, they had the greatest wealth transfer in the history of humanity. Okay, never before in the history of humanity has a generation had so much wealth. And I've said this many, many times, right? For every single society throughout human history, the next generation must surpass the previous. And for the next generation, for the millennials and Gen Z and Gen Alpha, there's really absolutely nothing you can do. They have completely destroyed the world that we lived in. They lived a comfortable life. Everybody could afford to go to university. Everybody can graduate at the age of 22, completely debt-free. Anybody can own a home and get married at the age of 23. Anybody that wanted to work hard can be debt-free in their 40s. But, life got too comfortable for them, and they started complaining like crazy. They say that, oh, the money you're paying me, even though I can afford a home, even though I can afford to get married, even though I can afford a family van, is not enough. I want more money to go to Las Vegas for gambling. I want to go to Venice next summer. I want to go shopping in Paris. So I need more money, and more money. How do I get more money? I'm going to form a union. I'm going to complain to my boss 24/7 for a wage increase. And if my boss does not give me the wage increase, I'm going to go on strike. And this is part of the issue with the local North American European culture. Because you ever heard of Chinese workers at a Chinese factory, let's say that's making iPhones, going on strikes? Do you ever see them on picket lines? No. Well, obviously, I don't 100% agree with the Chinese Communist Party's policies, but obviously they have their reasons for that, right? Have you guys ever heard of Chinese workers at a factory for Temu going on strike? No. Have you guys ever heard of Chinese workers working at Shein who are doing 16 or 18-hour shifts? By the way, if you're wondering that's real, I'm going to cover that in an upcoming video. Those Chinese workers who are working for Shein, they will never, ever go on strike. Well, in fact, they will never, ever have the right to go on strike. And obviously, the Western elites, they realize this. That's why they want to import millions of people from these countries in order to exploit them for cheap labor. Before, they didn't have an option because, Canada was a relatively homogenous. It was a 96% white country in 1981. So the local white elites, they just said, we've had enough of this, and we want to use these people for cheap labor. And the local white people are just too much union stuff, too much wage increase stuff. They want too much benefits. All of this stuff is detrimental to the company. So, instead, I'm going to use these Chinese people. So let's open up the borders and flood our countries with millions of immigrants. That's how we got to this stage. So, to the white people who keep saying that, we're becoming a global minority, we're disappearing from this world. Well, the previous generation of white people, you caused all of this. Don't deny it. Don't deny it. Okay, I've been living in Canada for almost 20 years, right? The silent generation, the boomers and Gen X. Okay, I met so many of these people over the course of the last 20 years. They love talking about the union and their workplace, and they love to go on strikes. And and ultimately, it is this obsession because if you want to form a union, if you want to go on strikes, basically you're declaring that your boss is your enemy, and it is because of this work culture, this obsession with the union, and ultimately this is what's leading to your downfall. And I don't think there's any way to reverse this trend.
Everybody knows that I'm breaking down. Everybody knows I ain't faking now. Everybody knows my heart's vacant now.